Good afternoon. I do believe I'm live here, so I would just like to say hello and thank you for joining my webinar this afternoon. This afternoon, I'm going to talk about reclaiming body sovereignty, and I'm so glad that you're here. And just a couple of things before we start. I just wanted to acknowledge that I was looking to have about a 45-minute time frame for this webinar. Could be 30 minutes, and I promise I won't keep you more than an hour. So I hope that suits you. Having a great afternoon wherever you are. For anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Sydney Bell, and I'm a social worker by training. And my practice is providing counseling and body image coaching services, which I do in person in Kitchener, Ontario, and also via online spaces like using Skype or Google Hangouts, and also courses and workbooks and things like that. So I also wanted to point out, for those who are here, there's a chat feature that I welcome you to engage in. So hopefully you can find that. And I will keep an eye on the chat window as best I can as I go throughout the presentation and answer any questions that you might have. Feel free to say hello. It's really great to have you here. I will also acknowledge this is, I'm a little bit new to this technology, so I think I've got a handle on it, but please forgive any blips or bloops, and I certainly welcome any feedback that you might have about this way of giving information and providing talks. So, okay, I think that's all of the introductory information that I have. Let's see here, just check a couple of things. All right, let's get going here. Let me just pull up. I have an overview for you of the topics that I want to go through during our time together. So I will just pull that up here and let you have a look at it. Okay. Okay, so you should be seeing now an image that just has a bit of an overview or an outline of the topics that I'm going to cover today. And that includes just generally a discussion about what body sovereignty is, why it's important. And then we're going to spend some time looking into some elements or some tools or pathways that I have found really helpful for those of us who want to become more body sovereign. And those include self-compassion, mindfulness, and discernment. So we're going to explore those three areas in a little more detail as we go on. All right. So actually, before we jump right into exploring what exactly is body sovereignty, let me just stop this one here. And what I am going to invite you to do is consider some reflective questions that I've prepared. And I'm just going to pull them up here. Let me just do that. Okay, so as we begin thinking about body sovereignty and how we might, what it is and how we might bring more body sovereignty into our lives, I think it's helpful if we just take a moment to think about what our relationship is with our body. And that first question there, ask yourself what impact has or does how you feel about your body have had on your life. And I also think it's interesting for us to consider if we're holding any beliefs that our lives would be different if our bodies were different. And it's also really important to consider when you're doing this work, what beliefs or assumptions you might have about people based on their body size, because often those preconceived notions that we might have about other people, we also then reflect them onto ourselves. So, and so finally, I ask you to think about a little bit, how do you think your life would be different if you felt good about your body just as it is, just right now, without it changing, without anything being different, if you were just able to accept it unconditionally? Do you think there would be, how do you think that would sort of unravel in your life? What impact would that have on your day-to-day experience of living and your well-being? So it's just some things I would like you to consider as we're going forward in this talk. Okay, so I'm just gonna take this down. Hi, here I am back. So the first thing that we wanted to, that I wanted to spend some time chatting with you about during our time together today was actually looking at what is body sovereignty and why is it important? Why is it something important to think about? And what I've come to see it as is really sort of a mind frame or a way of relating to your body when your experience of your body is self-determined. So what do I mean by that, right? Well, this is when the word sovereignty, when I say body sovereignty, it's interesting to just look at that word sovereignty for a little bit. And when you kind of look up the meaning of the word sovereignty, you learn that sovereignty is about being autonomous and being free from external control. So when I'm talking about body sovereignty, I'm talking about having an experience of your body that isn't trapped or shaped by rigid social conventions, especially the ones that we have now that are really focused on appearance and a really sort of narrow view of beauty or how we should be looking. So to be sovereign and to be body sovereign, we are free of those trappings. So how I really see that is we are able to come to a place of body sovereignty and moving forward in an autonomous way with our body by taking steps to learn to become more appreciative and grateful of our bodies just as they are. We reignite that body-mind connection. So many of us spend most of our time really disengaged from our bodies because we have because of the challenging relationship that we have with them. So we reignite that body-mind connection. And then we are able to regain the trust that we were born with. Our inherent right is an ability to trust our bodies to guide us, which unfortunately I think most of us have lost. So when we regain that trust in our bodies, we are able to fully re-engage with the world. So all of those are really what I see as important elements of body sovereignty. If anybody has any questions about any of that, I would be happy to answer. Now, thinking about, so we talked a little bit then about what it was, and I think it's also important to pause and consider why is it important? Why is this something that we should strive towards and work towards in our life? And there are quite a few reasons I think that are quite compelling to encourage us to do this work. And first of all, something like 95% of the population does not fit our current beauty ideal, that current standard that we're all setting ourselves up for, that we should all be sort of striving for and And as a result, there's a lot of shame and stigma that people are facing, a large portion of the population. I also think we need body sovereignty because it allows us to live a sort of a free and authentic life. When we have a challenged relationship with our body, when we're coming from a place of shame and mistrust, it's really hard to live an engaged and authentic life. We may make choices that we might not make if we felt good living in our bodies. We may not pursue our dreams to the extent. We may feel not good enough to treat ourselves well. So I think that's another really compelling reason why we need body sovereignty. I also think that there are really important health reasons to pursue body sovereignty, to let go of body shame, and to re-engage in a possible relationship with our body. I believe that body sovereignty reduces the risks of yo-yo dieting, which is really hard on our health, eating disorders, and those kinds of experiences. I also believe that when we're body sovereign, we are more likely to engage in health supporting activities. We are more likely to, when we come from a place of empowerment and compassion, we are more likely to maintain any behaviors that we take on in order to support our health. Okay. Just checking in, actually for the folks who are here, if you could just pop in a quick note into the chat function and say hello. I just got a text from my husband that maybe there's a big glitch going on. So if you're there and you can hear me, I would just appreciate a hello in the chat. So there's lots of really compelling reasons for pursuing body sovereignty, and really, you know, again, allowing us to live an authentic life. To oh, hi Anne, thanks for saying hello. It's great to know somebody is out there. Reducing sort of those risks of ill health that can result from living in a state of not feeling good about ourselves, and also then promoting positive behaviors when we're coming from a place of self-love. So that's sort of the overview of body sovereignty, what it is and why it's important. So now we're going to move on to talking about the elements of body sovereignty. Oh, hi, Candy. Oh, great. Thank you so much for posting. I'm glad that you're here. Great. So self-compassion, that's what we'll talk about now. And let me just put up a pretty little picture that I've got here. Give you a break from looking at me for a bit here. Okay. Well, there we go. Self-compassion. As you can see, I've written there, looking at yourself with soft eyes, which is something that, a phrase that came up in a sharing circle that I was attending quite a few years ago, and it just really stuck with me. And to me, when I think about self-compassion, that's the phrase that always comes forward, that I'm looking at myself with soft eyes. There's lots of really great people who have done amazing work and writing in the area of self-compassion, and I encourage you to, you know, check them out. Names that one name that immediately definitely comes to mind is Tara Brach. and she's done some really great work, and reading any of her books would be a lovely thing to do. And I often quote her when I'm talking about self-compassion and what it is. And one thing that she has said, it's that it's when we embrace our pain with the kindness of a mother holding her child, which I think is quite beautiful. So we're bringing that love and understanding that we often have for people in our lives, and we're actually offering it to ourselves, which is often quite a radical idea for people. So why is it important, especially when it comes to body sovereignty, to foster self-compassion in our lives? And so I believe that when we are self-compassionate, we care for ourselves. And we're also more likely to do, oh, hi, Amber, nice to see you here. We care for ourselves, and we are more likely to come to that place where we are willing and able to do some of this tough inner healing work, that reclaiming body sovereignty, or really any kind of healing work that we want to engage in. Because when we're more self-compassionate, we trust ourselves more, in that we trust that we won't be beating ourselves up, or we won't be at the risk of self-abuse. Self-compassion supports us in nurturing unconditional acceptance and respect for our bodies, I believe, and ourselves, no matter what our size, shape, or form. So one thing I think I like to also talk about when I'm talking about self-compassion, it's an important distinction to make, is that self-compassion is not self-pity. A lot of people, I think, are sort of hesitant about looking to become more self-compassionate in their lives, because they sort of lump it together with self-pity, and they think it's about, just being, oh, woe is me, and crawling under the blankets and hiding out all day. Not that we, might need to do that once in a while as well. But self-compassion is really, it's not self-pity. It's quite different. And a distinguishing feature between the two of them that I've found is that self-pity, if you're sort of in that self-pity state, it really can tend to be rather isolating. You kind of have that feeling of nobody has the troubles or the pain that I have, and which is a really easy trap to fall into, for sure. I know I certainly experience that from time to time. Whereas when we are embracing self-compassion, we move out from that sort of isolating space into a space that more recognizes that our pain is part of the human experience. Unfortunately, we actually feel more connected with the people in the world around us when we're feeling self-compassionate. We recognize that we're feeling pain and it's tough, and we sort of recognize that people all around us feel similar things, and we find that we're actually more motivated to do things to support our healing, right? It's actually a motivating way of caring for ourselves, whereas self-pity can be rather demotivating. So that's actually a really important distinction between the two. So I really encourage you to explore self-compassion, to look for resources and books, and look for ways that you can bring it into your own lives. I'll be talking a little bit about some tips, but before I go on, I just encourage you to think about a few of these self-reflective questions, and just to consider, like, what if you responded to your suffering with kindness? What would that be like? And how would it feel to know that you hold yourself in warm regard, that really you're cheering yourself on? And what do you think might be the relationship with self-compassion and accountability? which is something I was just chatting about, right? That a more self-compassionate way of viewing yourself tends to contribute to a more willingness to engage, to pursue goals, because you're not afraid to fail. Because if and when you do fail, as we all do, you know that you will be treating yourself with kindness. So it's actually a really powerful force in people's lives. So how can we bring more self-compassion into our lives? And there are a few ways, definitely. First is that notion of recognizing our common humanity that I talked about earlier, where we're feeling connected with other people in the experience of life. And it helps us keep our experiences in perspective, instead of letting sort of the bumps and bruises of our life bring our focus inward and immobilize us. So it keeps us connected to the flow. So looking for ways to really connect connect in that common humanity is definitely a way to support developing self-compassion in your own life. The next one is really working towards a sense of non-judgmental awareness or mindfulness. And I won't go into that too much because that'll be the whole next section that we're talking about. Mindfulness is such an important component of compassion and body sovereignty in general that I'm going to put some specific focus on that. But finally, before we move on to that mindfulness section, a really helpful way to support self-compassion is by offering yourself self-kindness. And they sound very similar, and they are very similar, but there's an important distinction where self-compassion is an opportunity or something that you offer yourself when you're feeling pain. Self-kindness is a practice that you engage in all the time, just not when you're feeling pain. And it really helps to develop that sense of, like I said earlier, that just general positive regard. And this has really been another level that has been a revelation to me, even in the last few months, that I hadn't really understood before, the importance of regular self-kindness, of looking for ways just to show myself that I generally wish myself well. And I've actually been engaging in a metta practice, as it's called, and I will just share that with you here. Let me just bring it up. So these are phrases that I take an opportunity to say to myself whenever I can, maybe during a sort of formal meditation when I'm sitting in reflection, or while I'm walking my dogs perhaps. And of course, I couldn't resist putting a photo of one of my dogs up here. So I hope you'll forgive that little indulgence. So I have found saying these phrases to myself just to be really helpful to build a general sense of sort of friendship with myself, or knowing again that I hold myself in a warm regard. And I have found when I build that foundation, I find it easier then, it's less of a stretch to move into offering myself compassion when I'm in pain, if that makes any sense. So, so here it's may I be safe, may I be healthy, may I be happy, and may I live with ease. And certainly, you know, you could kind of bring any phrases that resonate with you into a similar practice should you be interested in doing something like that. I want to mention that I was inspired to start this self-kindness practice by reading a book by an author named Michael Gerner, and I'll just write his name in the chat box here. And I believe his book is called The Art of Compassionate Living, The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion, I believe is what it's called. And I highly recommend his book. Really lots of insights and wisdom there for sure. Okay, so I think I am going to move on now from talking about self-compassion to talking about mindfulness, which is the next element of body sovereignty that I wanted to chat with you about. So mindfulness. So let's start with, again, what is mindfulness? It really is a buzzword, I think, that we hear a lot these days, because there's just a lot of recognition of how important becoming more self-aware is for any kind of, again, healing work that we're doing. And I think it's especially important when we're looking to regain our a positive relationship with our body, or body sovereignty, because, as I mentioned earlier, when we're challenged in our relationship with our bodies, a big part of that is often a disconnect. You know, when we're struggling and we don't feel comfortable in our own skin, we often have this fall into this sort of pattern or trap of just really kind of removing ourselves from our sort of bodily experience. So when we want to regain our body sovereignty, we really want to, you know, really encourage that mind-body connection. So a really sort of well-known writer and thinker on mindfulness is a fellow named Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he talks about mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So there's a lot in there that we could actually spend a lot of time unpacking, all those sort of different elements. But I just want to highlight that, you know, this is something we're doing on purpose. And I think it's especially important to remember the importance of bringing a non-judgmental attitude. If we're paying attention to how we are and how we're engaging, but we're bringing self-criticism along with that, it's not going to have the positive impact as letting go of judgment and just being aware in an open and curious kind of way. So why is mindfulness important? Well, I believe it helps us pay attention to our body and become more present to the physical world. And the emotional experience of the world, you know, all of those things. Being mindful helps us to trust that we will know when and where and how much to eat. When we have a challenging relationship with our body, it tends to invariably impact our relationship to food. And so bringing some mindfulness to our eating habits really can help to heal that that tension. The same with movement and exercise. Bringing more mindfulness to our experience of physical exercise can help us to again regain a positive experience of that. So mindfulness helps us see where we need to offer ourselves compassion. And compassion helps us to feel safe enough to open up to the information that mindfulness brings us. So there's such a strong interplay between mindfulness and self-compassion. They really do both support the work in a really interconnected way. Okay, so I wanted to, again, in this section on mindfulness, offer a few reflective questions for you to consider. So ask yourself what it means to you to be mindful. Is it a practice that you've ever engaged in or considered? What does it mean to be present when you do something? Is that something that sounds appealing to you, or more of a chore that makes you roll your eyes? It's actually really good for us to consider, when are those moments when we might be tempted to check out or not be present. I guess what immediately comes to mind for me might be sitting at family gathering, and perhaps somebody has made a troubling or racist comment. It might be easier just to sort of check out and go to my happy place, as I've often joked, rather than staying engaged in the present moment. And then it's also helpful to consider what your sort of checking out behaviors are. Everybody has different ways of doing that. Some might, there might be hanging out on social media, watching television sort of for extended periods of time, constantly checking your email. There's other sort of behaviors like smoking, or perhaps eating. If you're engaging in food in a way that's a coping mechanism, that can be a way that we use to check out. So if you're looking to regain a positive relationship with your body, it's really helpful to start thinking about where are the areas where you can bring more mindfulness to how you're engaging with your body, whether it's deciding when to eat, when to exercise. Are you responding to the hunger and fullness signals that your body is giving you? So some things to consider there. Yeah, so I'm just sort of looking over the tips that might help in terms of building more mindfulness. And again, that connection with our food might be an area for us, and really paying attention that if perhaps emotional eating is an issue that you're dealing with. Also, again, your relationship with exercise or movement. Is it coming from a place of punishment, or strictly just to achieve a goal for shaping or changing your body? Or are you finding joy in it? Or are you enjoying the movement of your body and how it feels afterwards? And finally, when it comes to mindfulness, really everything around mindfulness begins and really ends with our breathing, and looking to engage in some positive breathing practices, simply often just becoming aware of our breath and allowing ourselves to slow down now and then and pay attention to our breathing can really contribute to becoming more mindful and supporting our relationship with our body and becoming more body sovereign. And that can really happen on a continuum of just sort of an informal practice of becoming aware of your breathing when you find you're checking out or feeling stressed. Or some people really are drawn to more formal meditative and breathing practices, which can be really helpful as well. So that's wrapping up the section on mindfulness. And now we're going to just move on to the final section, the third element of body sovereignty, which I call discernment. Okay, so discernment, which is a term that not as many people are familiar with, at least in terms of relationship to body and body sovereignty. And so if we spend some time thinking about, well, what does she mean by discernment? Well, this is what I come to. To me, this is really about critical thinking and opening our eyes to the world around us. How is the world around us influencing our decisions? Remember, I talked earlier about really thinking about that word sovereignty, and coming to a place in our decisions that we sort of really are aware of what is influencing them. This is really where discernment comes in. And to me, it's really about balancing trust that we have in others who have wisdom with our own knowledge. So actually this webinar is a perfect example for those who are attending. It's for you to sort of balance what you know about me and what you might think about my thoughts or opinions, and being aware of your own experience, and being able to sort of kind of compare one against the other, and not necessarily taking advice or wisdom from other people, just sort of carte blanche, right? Being willing to take it, bring a critical eye, and accepting and using what you resonate with, and letting the rest go. So why is this important? Just think about all the information we are bombarded with in our lives, especially when it comes to our body, how we should look, how we become healthy. Wade through so many things, so many opinions and media, just bombarding us with images of how we should look, a real harmful idealized notion of beauty, the real prevalence of diet talk, and that we find in our places of work, with our friends and with our family. It's just everywhere. Not to mention so much confusing nutritional advice, opposing viewpoints coming from very sort of official sounding science-based places. That is the body shaming that's so prevalent in our popular culture, our news media, and within our friends and family. So cultivating discernment, this critical thinking, can really help us to determine what to do with information we're being presented with, and using it to make positive decisions. So in thinking about discernment, I encourage you to consider in what areas of your life do you tend to trust input from others or outside experts? And how do you decide who to trust? We all sort of have our different mechanisms. Our particular values might shape who we are more likely to trust, and sort of take their advice versus other people. And I also encourage you to think about your experience of tapping into your own wisdom, whether that's sort of intuitive wisdom or experiential knowledge. So one example might be, I always like to give the example of coffee, which, 1 week we're hearing how horrible coffee is, and the next week we're hearing how coffee drinkers live 50% longer than non-coffee drinkers, or whatever it is that we're being told. And we can find sort of a midway point in there by really looking at our own experience with coffee. Do we enjoy it? Does it cause any ill effects when we drink it? All of those kinds of things. When you are bringing a more discerning sort of look to these things, you are allowing value of your own experience to shape your decisions. So thinking about tips for discernment, let me just close this here. I think we're back. So how do we become more discerning? How do we bring discernment into our relationship with our body? So just a few things to suggest. Again, there's that whole notion of critical thinking, allowing ourselves to have a questioning attitude, whether it's about an article that we've read that's told us we need to do this or that. Another good thing to do is becoming self-aware of our own assumptions. Learning to gain more understanding of what are those things that we've maybe just held to be common sense, and be willing to just acknowledge them and to ask ourselves, is that true? How do I know that? That kind of thing. And it's also helpful to be looking for assumptions that might be underpinning the opinions or the advice from other people. So just generally being more aware of assumptions can be really helpful in becoming more discerning. And another thing that you can do is to become more aware to become aware, to look for black and white thinking. You know, that's just sort of the sort of really entrenched thinking of you're either right or you're wrong, sort of really dichotomous thinking can really make it challenging to be to be discerning, to bring discernment into your life, because often there's a lot more shades of gray that need wading through. And it isn't honestly easier, but you know, the decisions that you come to, if you're willing to sort of wade through some of those shades of gray, I think can bring you to a more sovereign place with yourself and with your body. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, again, is that embodied wisdom that I talked about earlier, which is really just an encouragement to check inward. And again, checking in with your intuition. Do you have a gut feeling about something? What is that telling you? You know, that's an important part of the puzzle when you're making decisions when it comes to your health and well-being. And again, there's that experiential knowledge. You know, what has, you know, your life told you, your own experiences when you've done different things. Maybe you've held on to this idea that you should be a runner, but you know that every time you go running, you just absolutely hate it. So that's, you know, when you're maybe getting into that trap again and thinking, oh, I really should be a runner. Well, and you're going back into that, your experiential knowledge and saying, hey, wait a minute, I never enjoy running. But you know what, I really enjoy yoga, or I really enjoy some other activity, and letting that influence the decisions that you make, really, and finally honoring your body's signals. So yeah, that's really the whole shebang there. So we've again talked about body sovereignty and what it is and why it's important, and spent some time talking about these three elements that I have found to be really helpful in my own journey and my own work with clients in terms of regaining a positive experience with their body. Again, looking to foster self-compassion, welcome mindfulness, and also bringing that element of discernment in. Certainly, there are lots of paths and ways to become more body sovereign and to develop a positive relationship with your body. This is just sort of one that I have found to be helpful. And I hope that you have found this to be helpful. And I hope that you're inspired to consider ways to becoming more body sovereign. And I'm just, yeah, now wrapping up. So if there's any questions or comments, please feel free to plunk them in the chat. One thing I'm going to plunk into the chat room is a sign up link for my newsletter. I put out a newsletter called Living Body Sovereign. It goes out once a month, sometimes 2 times a month if I've got more excitement to share. So if you're interested and you're not already on the list, because some of you out there may be members on already, but there it is. So thank you very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and feel free to contact me if you know, I can offer you any more resources or any more information on the services that I provide. Have a happy Sunday and a happy evening. Good night.